Hello and welcome back to the channel. It's time to take a look at another director's filmography and rank their output, in my opinion of course, from worst to best. This time round we're taking a look at Zack Synder. Synder made his name with a number of eye-catching music videos before getting his feature film career started with Dawn of the Dead. To date he has 7 films to his name, with his version of Justice League due to come out next year. So let's get started with the ranking. Up first and at the bottom of the pile we have Legend of the Guardians. An ambitious bid to kick off a franchise, this animated family adventure is not a bad film, it's just very forgettable. The design work is excellent and the animation itself is top draw, but the whole thing is let down by an uninspiring script and a story which feels overfamiliar and doesn't manage to do anything to mark itself out from the hundreds of similar stories out there. It's hard to really see much of an influence here from Synder as well, with no real signs of his normal stylistic flourishes. Everything feels a bit by the numbers, which makes for a solid but forgettable outing. Next up is Batman v Superman, or versus Dawn of Justice. And before anyone says anything, I am considering both the theatrical and extended cuts here. The film is hobbled by trying to be too many things at once, and so doesn't succeed at any one thing. Not as an individual story, or as a clash of two of pop culture's biggest icons, or in building up the fictional world for the intended multi-movie franchise. In terms of its one-off story, it's let down by jumps in logic. I mean, people honestly believe in this world that Superman shot people to death? And dozens of other quite fair questions you can ask about the plotting. Characters act very questionably. For example, Batman has to stubbornly distrust Superman until he doesn't. And the two heroes have to refuse to have a discussion with each other, something which pretty much would see them apprehend Luthor straight away. Things are not helped by the fact that Henry Cavill isn't given much of a chance to show a relatable side to Clark, despite some interesting story elements being initially set up, but then abandoned about his concerns over how he is perceived by the public and his role in society. Likewise, whilst Ben Affleck growls effectively as the Man in the Cowl, we're not given much to understand why this take on Bruce Wayne is seemingly as embittered as he is. A couple of background elements aside, we don't get any answers to this. Meanwhile, Jesse Eisenberg's Luthor aims for tortured genius, but lands at irritating and often nonsensical. For example, the bizarre Jolly Rancher interaction. Of course, again, he's not helped by large parts of his character's arc in both cuts, seemingly having ended up on the cutting room floor. In terms of the action, Synder brings his usual fondness for slow-mo, uncomic book style frame setups, which can be very effective. For example, the opening sequence of Bruce running through Metropolis and Batman clearing the warehouse, but the climactic struggle is overlong and again suffers from logic lapses. It pips Legends of the Guardians by at least having some memorable moments, for better or worse, but anyway, I will probably produce a full review of this one sometime in the future, so let's move on. Sucker Punch is a visual feast. The fantasy world sequences are filled with imagination and movement, and really lean into Synder's strength for visual storytelling. And the real world sections have a strong production design that performs another form of strong visual. The film's opening really underlines Synder's strengths and his ability to use visuals to convey a story. Where the film falls down is in its writing. Its overall message is unclear. The central conceit of a group of women working together to overcome oppression is arguably feminist in intention, but is undercut by the characters constantly appearing in overtly sexualized guises during the fantasy elements. And the distinction between what is happening in the real world and the fantasy world is at times troubling. Is our lead character retreating into a head to cope with literal physical and sexual abuse? It feels like the script needed a few more rewrites to really come together. The opening of Watchmen is fantastic. A montage that effortlessly recaps the history of a fictional world whilst evoking comic book art in the way the scenes are framed and set up. If anything, this sequence is so effective it harms the film that follows, with nothing else in the long runtime really matching it, although the flashback sequence of Dr. Manhattan's origin comes close. The rest of the film is handsomely staged and works as a strong adaptation of its source material. I'd even argue that the film's third act makes much more sense than the original graphic novel's version. But the whole film as a whole feels like it could either have been a very effective, tighter affair with some editing, or a very good miniseries given some extra time and broadened out. For me, it just kind of sits in the middle ground where it's neither one or the other. 300 is a living comic book, a straightforward tale that allows Snyder to really let his visual skills flourish. The bursts of slow-mo became a point of mockery, but rewatching they are still effective as they highlight the Spartans' drilled skills in the midst of battle against largely untrained masses. The washed out colour palette with flashes of red both accentuates the comic book origins of the tale, as well as the mythic nature of the tale as told by a narrator who is no doubt eulogizing his fallen friends. There's not much going on below the surface here, but it's a remarkably swish surface. Man of Steel does certainly have its weak points. The final fight goes on too long, and the case for criticism that Superman causes so much destruction in the city with little seeming care for bystanders is very fair, as are doubts over Pa Kent's desire to get a close-up view of a tornado. However, elsewhere there is a lot to like. For example, the extended opening on Krypton really leans into an otherworldly science fiction film more than any previous film incarnation of the story has. And it really works to sell the idea that Clark really is from another world. Russell Crowe more than stands up as Jor-El in comparison to Brando. Michael Shannon is fantastic as General Zod, a villain with an understandable motive who has been twisted by obsession. Henry Cavill is probably more convincing as the Superman side of the character than he is as the Clark Kent persona. And I don't quite go for Amy Adams as Lois. I can't quite put my finger on why, but for me she just doesn't seem to quite fit the part. The overblown finale apart, the story here allows Snyder to draw together some fantastic moments, with those such as Clark's first flight feeling genuinely uplifting. I honestly think Dawn of the Dead remains Snyder's strongest film overall. It's a different beast, certainly, to the film it's remaking, but crucially, it establishes a strong identity of its own. It has less of an eye on critiques of capitalism, but makes much more of its cast of characters as a surrogate family under siege. The opening few minutes are as heartbreaking as they are nerve-shredding and exhilarating. At first, we are given a normal day in the life of our lead character, with background hints of what's about to happen. From there, the horror of the outbreak is first pitched at a terrifyingly close family level, before our distressed lead, terrified and dismayed, discovers just how widespread and how quickly the apocalypse has run amok. From here, the film is fantastically paced, ebbing and flowing between calm and scares, comedy and horror. Snyder films the whole thing with clarity and energy, whilst managing to make the mall at the centre of the film feel both cavernous and claustrophobic. It's a film with a strong clarity of purpose, which easily could have been a by-the-numbers exercise, but Snyder infuses it with a verve and energy that hadn't been seen in the genre for a long time. One day it will be nice to see Snyder return to a similar project where there is no requirement to build a franchise or fit into an established multi-film universe after his years working with DC. So, which film from the list is your favourite? Where do you think I'm wrong? Which director would you like me to take a look at next? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you again soon.